Recording.
Okay, members will be aware the meeting will be recorded and will be uploaded to the website. If I can thank you all for your attendance this morning and start the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Kath, I think we've got a little list, haven't we?
Yeah, we've received apologies from councillors Charles, Moore, Nugent-Finn and Wright.
Okay, anyone else got any other apologies? No? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2 then is the minutes of the meeting of the 9th of March 2021. Is everybody happy with those minutes and that I agree to them being signed off?
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody against?
Yep.
No?
Yeah.
Okay, no. Thank you very much. To receive declarations of interest, does anybody have any declaration of interest? I wouldn't have thought so on this one because it's not that type of report. Okay. So agenda item 4 then is the statement of licensing policy relating to the Hackney carriage, taxi and private hire vehicles, drivers and operators. Kirsty, are you taking us through this report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so this report is to consider creating a statement of licensing policy relating to Hackney carriage or taxi and private hire vehicles, drivers and operators. We would look to incorporate the Department for Transport statutory standards and the Welsh Government's recommendations relating to the harmonisation of taxi and private hire vehicle standards in Wales. So to provide some background, in July 2020, the DFT published their statutory standards with the focus on the protection of children and vulnerable adults. These standards have effect in Wales, even though responsibility for taxi and private hire vehicle policy has been devolved to the Welsh Government. However, should the Welsh Government introduce legislation to regulate on these matters, then the DFT standards would cease to apply. But the Welsh Government have not yet introduced legislation, but what they have done is they've published some recommendations on the harmonisation of taxi and private hire vehicle licensing in Wales. So the aim of the recommendations in this document is to provide quick fixes to improve the consistency of licensing standards and increase public safety across Wales. So these recommendations form the basis for further development by Welsh Government into national standards. The Welsh Government have outlined 5 reasons in their document to adopt these standards. First and foremost is public safety. They say that the public should be able to expect a licensed driver to be competent, honest, safe and trustworthy. And they should also be able to expect to get in a safe vehicle. Other reasons that they've set out are better consistency of standards across Wales, harmonised enforcement, increased accessibility of vehicles in Wales, and better standards of customer service. So if I refer to paragraph 2.1 of the report, this lists the main changes that these statutory standards and recommendations will bring in. So if I just go through a few of them, so for example, in terms of drivers, changes would be they would be required to have a DBS check every 6 months and join the update service. Another change, overseas criminal record check for drivers. So if they've been out of the country for a certain period of time, then they would require a certificate of good conduct. We'd also require all new applicants to undergo mandatory safeguarding training. If I go on to vehicles, then it would require proprietors to have an annual basic DBS check. Again, for vehicle proprietors, they would require overseas criminal check if they've been out of the countries for a certain period of time. And it would also impose accessibility conditions on vehicle proprietors. And on a more general note, then it would mean reviewing our policy every 5 years. So what we're proposing today is that we create this statement of licensing policy relating to taxis and private hire vehicle drivers and operators. And this document will not only incorporate all of these new published statutory standards and recommendations, but it would also encompass all the other supplementary policies and conditions that we already have in place. So essentially, it'll just be one big document where we can find all the information. So hopefully this will simplify matters for applicants and licensees, as all the necessary documents would be available in one place. So we're proposing a 4-week consultation take place on any changes that we introduce as a result of these new statutory standards or recommendations by the Welsh Government. And following a consultation, then the responses would be taken into consideration, and the policy along with the responses would be put before the committee for consideration and approval. So if I move to the recommendations, the first recommendation we have is to take note of the statutory standards published by the DFT, as well as the recommendations published by the Welsh Government in relation to taxi and private hire vehicle licensing. The second is to approve the need to create this all-encompassing statement of licensing policy relating to hackney carriage and private hire vehicles, drivers and operators, incorporating these statutory standards and recommendations. And the third, to approve a 4-week consultation with the trade and the wider public on the proposed changes to policy, which would be included in a draft statement of licensing policy. And thank you, Chair. Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. Any members wish to speak? Jane?
Just a quick one. While I agree wholeheartedly with the document, the DBS update every 6 months, etc. Who's going to pay for this? Because it's not a cheap commodity, and I was wondering who it would pay. Whether it would the driver themselves would have to pay, or the company they work for. So just who's going to pay for these DBS checks?
So the DBS checks would be required to be paid by the driver. It's not very costly if they join the update service. It's only I think it's £13 or £14 for the whole year. So that's what we would encourage them to do. So one of the changes recommended by the Welsh Government is to get everybody to join the update service. So this is something that we're working with the other 22 Welsh authorities to come up with a way how we can encourage people to sign up to this update service, because not only will it be less costly for us to process, but also for the driver themselves, they'd be saving a lot of money. Like I said, £13 a year is not that costly.
Kirsty, can you just explain what the update service actually, in practicality, what it does?
Yeah, so essentially, when they first apply for their DBS, they would then be asked if they wanted to sign up to the update service. What it means is that we could do checks without having for them to go through the whole process again. It's just a simple way. They wouldn't have to come in, complete a whole load of forms, pay another £40 for a DBS. It just allows us to do checks.
So
periodically throughout the year.
Can you access that then at any time?
Yes.
If you had an inclination that the driver had done something, you could actually just, if they signed up to it, you could just access it then and check whether there's.
Yeah, we could liaise with the driver and we can do that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Julie.
The reason for the upgrading has there been a rise in incidents, or are we just overhauling it anyway?
I think the legislation governing taxi and private hire legislation dates back, so it's very old and it definitely needs updating. So this is something that the Welsh Government is looking to do. But this is kind of the first step of that. Like I said, it's more quick fixes at this time than introducing legislation. That's something that they might consider later down the line.
Yeah. As Kirsty said, the main taxi legislation dates from 1847, so I think it's about time it was updated. And the rest, I think, is 1976, isn't it? Most of the private hire is so even that's old. So I think it's long overdue, and it'd be good. There'll be a lot more meat for us to discuss at the next meeting, because we'll have the policy in front of us then, which has been drawn up. But Catherine.
We can save this for the next meeting if you want to. It was just a question from a procedural point of view. So accepting that an individual gets a DBS check and something comes up that nobody knew about before, is there going to be a mechanism as to what would happen to that individual then? That would be my question, I suppose.
if something appeared on the DBS check that we hadn't considered before and it falls within our suitability guidance, then they would come back to committee for consideration on whether they were a fit and proper person.
Yeah, and there's also the question then of whether they've breached their conditions by not informing us of any conviction that's happened since their last DBS check, which they should do within 7 days, I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Councillor Driscoll.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So if they sign up for this update, do you automatically check every 6 months then? And do the DBS, does that cover driving convictions as well?
So in terms of checking every 6 months, this is a recommendation brought about by the Welsh Government, but we currently don't do it, but it is something that we would look to do under these new recommendations. In terms of, sorry, what was the second question?
Do they? Yeah, sorry, John. Yeah, driving offences. Does that show up on a DBS?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So, for example, if it was drink driving, it probably would show up on the DBS check. If it was points for speeding, for example, that doesn't show up on the DBS check. But they are also required to have a DVLA record when they apply for their licence, so it would show up on that.
I mean, most of the problems we get are with drivers not declaring convictions for driving, don't they? Yeah, that seems to be the most regular problem we have in this committee.
Well, we have ways to pick that up. So, like I said, the DVLA report, we would always have that when considering an application for a driver.
Thank you.
Okay, Margaret.
Thank you. Just simple, really. After we go, this gets passed, say today, if it does, and then we go into the 4 weeks and all the other concentration. How long is this before it comes, a law by the Vale of Glamorgan Council?
That would be something for us to consider at the next committee. So we would have an implementation date.
Yeah, what normally happens, Margaret, is when it comes back to committee, if we approve the policy that comes back to us, then we will set a date for when it comes in. The committee will set the date, so it'll be, as long as there's no problems with it, it'll be very soon after the next meeting. Any other members? Any questions? I can't see any more hands up. No? Would somebody like to move the recommendations?
I'll move to note the F, is it? No I, to note I, and then to approve little 2 and little 3. It must be little 1. I even got glasses on and I can't see properly. Recommend, take note of the first and then approve the second and the third.
The third, yeah. So basically we'll accept it. You're moving that we accept the recommendations.
Yeah.
I second it.
For that?
I'll
Jane?
second it. Yeah.
Okay. All members in favour? Happy? Nobody against? Shout if you're against.
Yeah. All for.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's clearly members are happy with that. There's the only. I can't get back to my agenda now on my computer because, but I think it's the only item on the agenda, isn't it? So there's nothing urgent. So can I thank you all for your attendance? And as I say, the next meeting should be a bit more interesting because we'll actually have the detail of what's going into this new policy. And we've been a long time waiting for this. It'll be good to get it sorted and get it onto the statute.
Yeah, John, can I say it'd be good to have a nationwide policy, wouldn't it?
Well, I think the hope with this is that all, nationwide, as in Wales anyway.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Hopefully all the authorities in Wales will come up with something very similar because we'll all be following the same guidelines in setting the policies. So although the policies won't be exactly the same, they should be taking the same principles into account in setting them. So that should be good. Okay, well, thank you very much. And look forward to seeing you whenever.
Thank you.
Thank you.